So, Vince, why don't you kick things off by talking about the Notre Dame? We're going to pull this up here, talking about the Notre Dame. Actually, we've already the Notre Dame. We're going to talk about the Notre Dame run game first. Let's kick into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously these are the 2020 numbers, and that's important that we talk about that, because the game that Notre Dame just played, they were really, really good against the run game in the first half, and they were very aggressive in the run game, which I really, really, really liked. I thought they dictated the tempo. I thought that they had the quarterback, Jordan Travis, throwing off schedule. I thought that the run game was really going nowhere, until they busted off that 89-yard run, right? And that was just some missed tackles and some things of that nature. So when you look at these numbers right here, Notre Dame's run defense was pretty darn good last year, right? 113 yards a game, 16th in the country. Yards per attempt, 3.8. That's 36 in the country. You'd like to see that number be a little bit better if they're going to be a championship quality defense. That's one area I'd like to see them improve a little bit. I'm okay with 113 yards a game personally. I think that's pretty darn good. And after game one, they're chasing that number. So but I think that's going to get better. But then when you look at Toledo's run game, it wasn't terrible, right? They average 168 yards a game. That's good for 59th in the country. And then their yards per attempt, not as good, 4.2, which put them at 75, which is pretty much right down the middle in that neighborhood. It's okay. They only scored 8 touchdowns, though, which I find to be on the very low end of things. But that's because they like to throw the ball a little bit more, and they're not going to be dependent on their run game as much. So, this is going to be an interesting one, because I think Notre Dame has something to prove in this game, especially after the second half that they had. And I think that's really what I'm going to be keeping my eye on, is can they play a full game, start to finish, and play the way they did the first half of the game.
I think the other thing, too, about this matchup, Vince, is, you talk about how important it is for Notre Dame to slow down the run game. These numbers, to me, are a little bit misleading to what Toledo has been in the past. And I think last year there was some thing, with COVID and everything, they averaged 168.2 yards per game. They were at 224.5 the year before that, 215.9 the year before that. So and then this, then they ran for 205 at 5.3 yards per carry against Norfolk State. So, and again, a lot of that was with their backup. So Bryant Koback only carried the ball 9 times for 52 yards, 5.8 yards per carry. So they're a better running team than their numbers showed a little bit last week. So this is also partly what, to me, makes Toledo dangerous. The whole big intro of the show, we were talking about, the quarterback and the passing game and the RPOs and all that kind of stuff. Well, this has been their bread and butter in recent years. Mm-hmm. And that ability to be balanced is partly what makes this a dangerous football team and what makes them a legitimate contender to win the MAC this year. And so, again, this is a game where if you're not disciplined, if you don't control the line of scrimmage, like you should, if you don't tackle well, if you're not disciplined, if you're not assignment correct, they're going to hurt you. Now, if Notre Dame does what they're supposed to do, they'll shut down the Toledo run game, right? And at the end of the day, understand that's where we're coming from. It would be really easy for us, because anyone can do this, to say, it's Toledo, they're a MAC team. If Notre Dame does what they should do, they should dominate. Oh, okay, sure, but that's not analysis, right? Anyone that has a Google can figure that out. The fact of the matter, however, is if we're going to look at this from a real football standpoint, this is the kind of test you want a week after playing Florida State.
Absolutely.
And what I mean by that is this, Vince, and I want to hear your opinion on this, because you and I have actually never talked about this on the show. I had talked about this before you and I were able to finally team up after we've been trying to team up for a decade. I have always felt that when my teams would struggle with something, or a team would give us a look that we had a hard time with, I was always fired up when we saw that, when we were going to see something similar the next week. Because I wanted to make my adjustments while it's still fresh on their mind. And it's one thing to make adjustments and then, you're not going to see that for 3 weeks.
Right.
I wanted to make my adjustments and then build it back into the game plan and then attack it again that next week. And when you look at the Marcus Freeman defense, to me, this is a great opportunity for them to say, hey, look, what are the things we struggled with last week, right? Athletes in space. Okay, Toledo's got those. a quarterback that can do things with his arm and his legs. Okay, Toledo's got a couple of those guys. An offense that with the RPOs is going to make it difficult for you. They're going to run those long rides, so the linebackers have to be sound and aggressive. The D-line has to penetrate, tackle, do all those things. Check, check, check. So all the things that you struggled with last week, you're going to have to do. You're going to have to be faced with those certain situations again, which to me is perfect for Marcus Freeman and Mike Elson and Mike Mickens and Chris Lear, because all the things that they wanted to correct on film this weekend are going to have to be put right into practice against Toledo.
That's a really good point.
I like that's all because I always liked that as a coach.
Yeah, that's a really good point. From my level, it was always odd fronts versus even fronts and things like that, because high school teams, if you're a 3-front, you're going to be a 3-front. If you're a 4-front, you're going to be a 4-front. There's not a lot of movement between the two. And so if we had a team that we were playing that was a 3-front, which is more of an the words. I was going to say it's more of an odd front, but yes, it's an odd front. But it's not as common. That's what I wanted to say. But when we would see that 2 weeks in a row, and if we struggled with it the first week, and we talk about it in film, like, dude, with your center and the double team with your center and your guard and things of that nature, and getting the snap off with a guy in your head and blah 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 blah, and we would hammer it home in the film, and then if you had a 4-front the next week, it's like, well, that didn't matter. Thanks for that coaching, coach. But then if you had that same front the next week, that it all parlays in, and then you see them execute, and it's like, yes, thank you. That's what we were looking for. It's wonderful. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful. And you make a good point. Now, are these athletes the same that they saw against Florida State? No, but it's the same type of offense. It's the same type of players that they saw against Florida State.
And they're good enough
to
where if you're still undisciplined,
you're going to get burned.
Like Brian Koback may not rip off an 89-yard run. I think they may be able to catch him, but because he's not as fast as Deshaun Corbin, but he's still going to hurt you if you make those same mistakes. If you're not able to, but the thing he also brings, he's a little thicker, a little stronger than these guys. So he's a nice one cut and go guy. You're going to have to be disciplined against this offense. And I think when you look at the run game, this is going to be a good test, because the run game last week was good early, and then bam, you give up the big play, and then shutting them down again. And then the second half, once they went away from the 4 down and they went away from attacking, that's when Florida State piled up a bunch of yards on Notre Dame. So it was a little bit misleading at times. Florida State, other than a couple big runs, didn't really move the ball effectively against the Notre Dame defense with any consistency. It was the big plays. Then Notre Dame went away from what worked for them, and it was kind of the other thing. It was the bleeding out, the slow death. This week, you need to get back to being aggressive. You mix up your looks. Again, I'm okay with the 3-man stuff, but I need your roster right now is better in a 4 down.
Agree.
And now that you have all the injuries to linebacker, Shane Simon's out, Maris is out, Paul Moal is out, there's even more reason to be more of a 4 down team. And so that's the adjustments I want to see. What adjustments do you make as a coaching staff that's going to let us know that you're prepared to not repeat what we saw last week? And that's going to tell us a lot about Marcus Freeman. And I'm optimistic that he's going to look good doing it. And the staff is going to make good changes. And this is a good enough test to where we're going to find out if they're able to make those kind of quick adjustments on the fly.
Look, when everybody's healthy, I still think that they're better as a 4-front than they are as a 3-front. I'm okay with them mixing it up, obviously, because they have guys that can do that. But the point that you made about the fact that there's now injuries at the linebacker position and the depth is being tested at the linebacker position, I think you even go more, head into the 4-front looks. Yes, I still want them to mix it up a little bit, absolutely, because you need to keep offenses on their toes. But I think this team, their identity has to be a 4-front. It has to be. We saw them get some serious pressure as a 4-front. I mean, we were seeing, Jason Adamiola, Justin Adamiola. We were seeing those guys just absolutely penetrate. Foskey was getting in the backfield when they were in a 4-front. When they were in a 3-front, we didn't see as much penetration unless they were bringing a linebacker or unless they started Foskey off the line and then they were bringing him up, right? That's when we saw penetration, when you had 4 guys at the line of scrimmage. And I think that's when these guys are at their best. And now that the linebackers are being tested as far as the depth, I just think that has to be your identity, and that's going to be what I'm going to be looking for when they step out on the field on Saturday with Marcus Freeman, because he has to see it. If we see it, he sees it, right? And
we both agree Marcus Freeman's a pretty smart guy.
Absolutely.
And I know there are some people that think that all of a sudden think one game means he's not a good coach anymore. I don't see that. I don't see it that way. I think that they were actually doing a lot of what I expected with a couple mistakes here and there, which you and I also said kind of be prepared for. But it was that once they went away from what they do, and that's why I say don't go away from who you are. Be who you are. And if you want to call off the dogs and put your number twos in there and let them run your defense. And they didn't do that, especially in the third quarter. So to me, I want to see those adjustments. I want to see what kind of motivator Marcus Freeman is to go out there and get those guys to handle adversity. Look, everything has been going great for him, right? Since he was hired, and recruiting's going well, and this is going well. And they dominated in the spring and they did all those kind of things. Well, okay, now you face some adversity. How do you handle it? And that's the test, not for Marcus Freeman and Mike Ellison and Mike Mickens and Chris Lear, but that's going to be the test for the leadership of this football team at the player level. How do you respond to the struggles? And to me, this part of the game is we're going to find that out, because I want to see them kind of take that out on them. I want to see them take that out on Toledo. Because if you can take it on Toledo, this is a good football team. Again, this isn't New Mexico. This isn't Bowling Green, right? Does that mean you can't dominate them? I'm not saying that at all.
Right.
But what I am saying is that you have to be able to play your game in order to do that.
Well, and I feel like there's a possibility that Notre Dame could dominate and not play well. There is that possibility. But again, like we were talking about with the offense,
are you saying because their players are just so much better? Is that kind of what you're okay?
That's what I'm alluding to. Yes. But again, with the offense, like with the offensive line, we were talking about what we need to see that they're taking steps. I'm going to need to see similar things with the defense, right? Better contain, better tackling late in the game, things of that nature. That's going to make me feel really good about where this defense is, right?
Yeah, see, go ahead. I'm sorry, Vince. I thought
No. I was done. Yeah.
I know how I didn't want to interrupt you. Please.
I've never said that to you, by the way.
I know. You just get your lackeys to do it for you. I know how it is. I know how it is. Get your buddies to do it. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That's what I like about the show. It is a back and forth.
Yes.
But I'm going to somewhat disagree with you.
Okay.
I agree with you 100% when we're talking about the matchup of the Notre Dame offense against the Toledo defense. I think Notre Dame could not necessarily play well and dominate, kind of like what they did to Florida State last week, right? There are some things they didn't really do well on offense, and they still had 400-some plus yards and 41 points, right? For me, it's more of this side of the ball. I don't think you can play bad or not well and still dominate, because I think the skill level, the overall talent of Toledo's better. The size of Toledo is a little better. They're not going to just physically overwhelm them like they can to overwhelm the Toledo defense. They've got some legitimately good size on their offensive line for a MAC team. I mean, their offensive line is 310, 6'6", 310, 6'4", 307, 6'3", 295, 6'4", 290, 6'4", 290. And they're kind of an or at right tackle between a 6'4", 290 guy and a 6'4", 315 guy. So there's some good size there. So I don't think Notre Dame can just overwhelm them with size and speed. There's enough athleticism where if Notre Dame doesn't play well, they're still going to probably win. They'd have to turn the ball over a bunch of times and things like that to lose. I'm not saying they're going to lose, but I think if they don't play well, I do think that Toledo can hurt them and make this a closer game than it should be. So that's the one. So on this matchup, now the matchup from earlier, I'd agree with you 100%. 100%. But this matchup, I think, is going to be – they're not going to hold them to 13 points and not play well. Unless their quarterback just, sees this is Notre Dame Stadium, and he's hitting linebackers in the chest, right? Like, if that happens, sure, that you're correct. But assuming something like that happens, I think Toledo can score 24, 27. Okay. It's a lot like the matchup when we had about UMass in 2000. It's going to sound funny, but in 2015, I remember talking about Tajay Sharp back then. Like, this guy's going to play in the NFL, and he did. He played in the NFL for a while now. He's been a decent NFL player, and he had a quarterback that had a big arm, and there were some athletes that if Notre Dame doesn't play well, these guys are going to score, and they did. And that was against the Brian Van Gorder defense. This team is even better than that one because that team had a great NFL receiver, but this team has better talent all around and a better line. So that to me is a little bit of the difference.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I have more faith in what this front seven can do. I saw too many flashes of brilliance from this front seven in the first game. I just feel like if they play that way, there's nothing that Toledo's going to be able to do.
But see, to me, that's not playing bad, right? That's what I'm saying. Is you said if they can still dominate and not play well.
Okay.
What I'm saying is if they just play well, not dominant, but just well, they'll shut Toledo down for the most part.
Okay.
What I'm saying is if they play poorly, Toledo will hurt them.
Okay.
That's what I'm
fair.
saying. Notre Dame's offense could maybe not play that well and still just muscle up and outman Toledo's defense.
Right.
If Notre Dame
saw
plays,
what happens when Notre Dame's defense doesn't play well. They get run over. Run by.
Right. If Notre Dame's defense plays like it did the first 2.5 quarters against Florida State before they changed to their let's not attack anymore, Toledo doesn't have a chance. Because as you said, there was a lot of dominant moments. Yes, they made some mistakes, and they may make some mistakes against Toledo and give up a good player or two, but they're still going to dominate because you can clean that stuff up. Exactly right, Vince.
Right.
You can clean that stuff up. You can clean that stuff up, right? Sure. But they may make some big plays, but you're not going to consistently move the ball up and down the field on the Notre Dame defense. And again, like I said, Toledo's got good talent. They don't have necessarily Florida State talent. Although I think their quarterback is a better passer than what we saw on Sunday night. So I think that would be one area where I'd push back a little bit on this particular matchup.